fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube with inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching the outside of the sphere.
Roger. There's troubleshooting as soon as I hear.
So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
This is David Marler, UFO researcher, and you're listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. As always, my name is Andy. Really looking forward to speaking with the guest that I have on with me today. She's not doing too many appearances to promote the upcoming book, which is just released in the UK, so I've not had a chance to read it fully yet, but I have been on Amazon looking at the previews, I've been looking at all the feedback, and I've ordered my copy already. I have co-author of Trinity, The Best Kept Secret, with Jacques Vallee. I have Paola Harris, but I'll be calling her Paula for the interview. Paula, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Andy. And yes, I'm not doing a whole bunch. I am exhausted. And what Jacques and I had agreed to do is do a couple together because, the book is done together. I was working on it for 5 years, and then he wrote to me about the metal part. And then when I told him about the story, for the last 4 years, we have been going back to New Mexico at least 3 to 4 times a year. So, that's become like a second home, to go back on the site, to talk to the witness, to bring scientists down there. So it's been 4 years. So we agreed that, we would do as many as we could. I think he's really tired right now. And I think he's also going back to Paris. He has an apartment in Paris and he lives in San Francisco. But Andy, I'm really glad to meet you. You can ask anything you want. I will try to answer for me and for Jacques. And, thank you for reaching out to me. I'm just so happy to meet you. You're Scottish.
I am, for my sins, yep. And do you know what? I've only ever had one 3-star review on iTunes that complained about my accent, so I'm doing not too bad so far. So
I love your accent. In fact, you can interview me anytime you like. I love Ireland. I love Scotland. I've traveled, not for this case, but I'm more well known in Europe, Andy, because I'm Italian. And from 1992 to 2007, I was the principal and taught at the American Overseas School of Rome. I have an American connection to Rome, in that even though I was born in Italy, my father was a diplomat. I am a teacher, so I have a master's in education. I was teaching Mel Gibson's kids, Ursula Andress's kids at this private school. And that allowed me, the money from my teaching allowed me to do the research, because there is no money here. A lot of it has gone on. I've never been supported or anything. So I was in Europe from 1992 to 2007. So I was all over the place. I was going to England. I was going to Greece. I was going to Switzerland. I was in Norway. It was like next door to go to these countries. It's a little bit farther from the United States.
Yeah, it's just a bit, and we've got listeners all over for the podcast as well. So many of them, it sounds like, know you already, given the questions we had in. But before we get to the questions, I'll obviously got some for you as well, Paula. So there's been a lot of interest and intrigue on this book, and a little confusion around its release and some changes. But before we get to that, can you just tell the listeners about the book and how it came to be?
All right. Well, this is a case. So when Jacques and I did this, remember, this is a case study, one case. And I was working on it. I had heard about it when I was living in Italy. 2 little Indian boys, but they're not Indian, they're Hispanic, watched a UFO come in, crash over their heads, and then went up to the craft and saw the 3 creatures, the 3 beings. And then they watched the cleanup or the recovery, which took almost 8 days. And so they would be like on the arroyo looking at the recovery. And then when the soldiers, who were the same soldiers from the atomic bomb, went to the Owl Bar and Cafe to get drinks and see the girls, they left it alone. And the 9-year-old boy, Remy was 6 and Jose was 9. Jose went inside and took a piece, a big piece that was fastened to the wall of the craft. So we have the location, the witnesses. Of course, we lost Remy in 2013, but I found a new witness. So altogether, there are 3 witnesses, all children, and we have the location. And we have the medal. So I was working on it, and I brought the whole world down there. I brought MUFON down there. I brought everybody down there, and then out of the clear blue sky, I get an email from Jacques Vallee saying, I heard you have some metal. So Jacques, who is a scientist, is working on metametals, as you know, and he was very interested in the piece the boy pulled off the wall. But as I'm telling him about the case, he became fascinated with it. And as I was telling you, we have been back to New Mexico. You could see Jacques walking around in the fields there. I'm sitting in a chair because I'm afraid of snakes, and I've seen so many rattlesnakes and down there. So he went down there, and I went with him at least 3 to 4 times in 4 years. So total 9 years research on one case. And when he went down there, he saw the framework that this all happened 1 month after the atomic bomb. So we sat down and had a conversation. Here's the cover of the book. The cover has Mama Grande, who's an Apache Indian, and Jose, the 9-year-old. Mama Grande has a background in San Antonio, and he talks about the framework, which is important. You can't just go down there, do a case, and walk away, pick up a phone, talk to witnesses, and do a case. So he talks about what those little boys lived like. I mean, the craft crashed on the Padilla property, which is 80,000 acres, that is rented, is leased from the Bureau of Land Management. It is 20 miles from where the bomb exploded, and all this happened 1 month after the bomb exploded in 1945. So I'm going to add one other thing, and then we can go on to the questions. There was no Kenneth Arnold. There was no flying saucers. There was no Roswell. There were no newspapers. There was no YouTube, and there was no TV. So when those kids saw the avocado-shaped craft, they did not know what they were looking at.
Now, you've held up the cover of the book, and this will go out in audio format, but then via video on YouTube in the next couple of weeks as well. The cover of the book had a little bit of controversy, and if you could just explain this, on Amazon for some time and other book websites, there was a different cover of the book that was a bit simpler, and it only had Jacques listed as the author. So there was a lot of rumours, of course, of what the book was going to be. All we knew, it was called The Best Kept Secret. That was it. There was no Trinity, and it was just Jacques. What happened that came down off the website for a day or two? It was uploaded with the new cover and also with yourself attached.
Okay, well, the best kept secret is that it had to be kept secret. If you look at the cover, there's a map on there. And he didn't want people going to the location before the book came out, because then the whole world would go down to New Mexico. I mean, you could see where it is on this map. So he wanted a innocuous cover where they would not be studying this whole thing before we even got the book out. Plus, we had just encountered a third witness, so we had to rewrite the book. I think we redid it at least 7 times. And what he did was he included Sabrina. Now, Sabrina was Jose, the 9-year-old's cousin who lived with the father. We just found her. She just verified all kinds of amazing things, like she was playing with the fiber optics and the foil, long strips of foil that would crunch up and go back. Jose didn't know that because he had no foil. But the father did. He went back to the crash site and picked up foil, and the little girl that was living with them was playing with this. So all this new material, we had to re-release the book. And when we re-released the book, now that map is on there and more detail is on there. I mean, we're still hoping to protect the witness and the location. So he decided, let's just wait. Let's re-release it with the new testimony. The new testimony is at least 35 pages. So we got a complete product now. Did I answer your question enough?
Now, in a recent interview, yes, absolutely. Yeah, that clears it up. And you know this subject better than many. And there was a lot of conspiracy around it was taken down because there was too big a secret within it. But it was just a placeholder cover. That's all you're saying, and that's why it was. And that makes sense to me. And I'm sure the listeners will appreciate that as well. Now, I watched your interview with James from Engaging the Phenomenon, and I would encourage anyone who hasn't yet to go on YouTube and watch that interview. And it's got Jacques on there with you. During that interview, Jacques describes the case as not being as sexy as Roswell in his own French way. But for you, what made it so compelling? Because you've said there, Paula, that it's got the materials, it's got witnesses, it's got a crash, it's got beatings. Yeah, it's got.
I mean, it's got it all. It's funny, Andy, you're using that word "sexy" because I was thinking about that all day today. Because the truth is that the way ufology is now, the only thing that goes viral is 60 Minutes, a TV show, or conspiracy theory, or things that are being hidden, or government cover-up. This is a case study. I mean, you would have to read it and learn a lot about the history of the atomic bomb and the fact that Oppenheimer would have had to know the Owl Barn Cafe is 4 miles from this place. And the Owl Barn Cafe, which is on the Pan American Highway, was the only watering hole. And that's even where the kids, the young guys that cleaned up the crash went on that last day. That's the only place they could go. There was a soda fountain, there was a grocery store, and behind the Owl Barn Cafe were the headquarters of the scientists, the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, all the top secret guys. And I asked the owners of that cafe, did you know what they were doing? And they said, no, we thought they were salesmen because they came in with their leather briefcases and we thought they were salesmen. Now, you imagine keeping a secret that you're going to blow an amazingly powerful weapon about 20 miles away. And as Jacques explained in that other interview, that was no test. That was a regular, bomb, it wasn't a test. It was regularly exploding a bomb. And what they didn't do is they didn't tell the people. So people like Jose's mom, the 9-year-old's mom, opens the door at 3 a.m, and she sees the light of 1,000 suns. Can you imagine that described? There is a book called The Light of 1,000 Suns, and she's blinded in one eye. And his eardrum is punctured. And I'm not even going to go into what happened to the 70,000 people that didn't know this was going to happen, because this is a twofold book. This tells of the explosion of the bomb, the fact that nobody knew, the fact that even the cattle were taken to Oak Ridge to be tested, the fact that I'm sure Oppenheimer knew after the crash because he was right there. And Oppenheimer and Einstein actually wrote a letter to Truman saying, hey, we got problems when we started messing with atomic energy because we're getting a lot of sightings here. We're getting a lot of sightings. What do we do now? And logically, I mean, beyond this book, would people understand that we went into the nuclear age and somebody was watching? Somebody out there was watching and wanted to make a statement. So whatever those creatures were, or whatever that crash happened, I think was the statement to the starting of the nuclear age. I think when you start to explode a bomb in our dimension, there's no way it doesn't affect other dimensions. There's no way. And, we went on, and I did research in Italy on this. This was one of the most dangerous stories I ever did. I went on to interview people in the Pacific that were working on the H-bomb, which was much more powerful than the A-bomb. That's the only time they ever came into my apartment on the 7th floor in Rome and took everything, including the film footage, and stole 20,000 euro worth of materials from my house. The man that I was interviewing at the time was a French geophysicist who was on the island of Fangatofa and saw the UFOs fly over on 2 different occasions. So let me assure you, somebody is watching.
Now, you said very concisely there that someone is watching. Yourself and Jack have said in previous interviews that this was a response or a message from that explosion. Now, the time frame for me is interesting, that it was 1 month after that explosion, that nuclear explosion, that this object appeared to have crashed. Now, do you feel there's any significance to the fact that it was 1 month had passed? Or is that 1 month has passed for us, but when you mention different dimensions, is it a case that it wasn't necessarily a month that's passed for the beings or the object?
Wow, Andy, you're taxing me now. You're making me think. I never thought about that. Really. I will tell you that there's some really weird things about this case in that they only appeared to children, little kids. So the little kids, they're little kids. They're 6 and 9. And of course, Jose, by that time, was driving a truck. He was delivering hamburger to the Owl Bar and Cafe. He had his own horse. So did Remy. They were fixing windmills. They were fixing fences. In those days, the kids were part of the ranch from when they were tiny. And Sabrina was telling me, too. She said she'd take a walk. She'd go over to the crash site. It was all burned. She said the vegetation after 70 years does not come back. Those mesquite trees were like 4 to 5 feet high. Now they're like 1 foot high. So the fact that, number one, we could have disturbed the dimension, and maybe it was, a response. Number two, that they appeared to children. In other words, children. When those 2 kids saw the crash come over their head, I mean, it took out part of a radio tower. There was a thunderstorm, so they had stopped. You can read the book in detail. They both told me the same story. They do not live close to each other after all those years, but they told me the same story. They stopped. They saw the thunderstorm. The craft came in, took out a piece of the radio tower, and landed, took an L shape and landed and stopped to where a berm was, but it was fully powered. And when they went up there with their little binoculars, I think it was like 500 feet away, they stood and watched those beings for almost an hour and a half. Like they're watching these creatures going, Jose said they were sashaying, which means they were kind of floating. They'd appear here and then they appear there. There were 3 of them. And then Jose felt that they were crying. He said it was like a screechy baby, and he wanted to go in and help. He said, they're hurt. He kept saying they're hurt. This is a response of children. It wouldn't be a response of adults. Adults would go in there with a rifle and just kill them all because we finish the whole thing, But these kids they're not used to seeing anything like this. And then the 6-year-old later on told me that before dying, that he had a vision that they had given him of people falling out of a skyscraper, and he's never seen skyscrapers because he was living in New Mexico. Now, that sounds an awful lot like 9/11 to me. So, we've got psychic communication with these kids, and they're kids.
Now, we've got a craft that is either flying a great distance or travelling a distance through dimensions, space, whatever it may be, we're not sure. How does it still come to crash in inverted commas or even make contact with a radio tower, given what must be an incredibly advanced technology?
Well, even with Roswell, the storms in New Mexico are like nothing I've ever seen. Nothing. The thunder and lightning is just terrible. And I've been in Mexico so often. I've been to Roswell and so forth. And also with the Roswell crash, it was a storm. However, I think where you're going, Andy, was it done on purpose?
Yeah.
And I can't tell you that because I don't know that, you don't know that, but that's a great question. Was it done on purpose so we would report about it? So it would catch our attention. I do know that that particular case did not go into the Blue Book files. Where it went is into the files of the Atomic Energy Commission, which is what was going on down there. And I know that because Remy worked for the governor of Washington State. He was a Gig Harbor, her name was Dixie Lee, and he helped get her elected to governorship. So to thank him, she let him see the file, and she was the head of the Atomic Energy Commission stuff in Washington State. And if you know anything, and you listen to, I think that Jacques talked about this in James's, the Atomic Energy Commission does not answer to the president. That's one of the agencies that, unless you have a need to know. But may I encourage people, because you work together, that they also see James's interview with Jacques, because I think he said that. However, I found out about that because Remy told me that. He said, "Oh, well, she thanked me. She let me see my case, and would never have gone into the Air Force. There was no Air Force. It was Army Air Force in 1945. It would never got into Blue Book because I didn't start that then. So where's it going to go? And as far as taking the craft to Wright-Patterson, we think they took it to Los Alamos."
And would you say this was the first known crash of a craft from somewhere else, especially on that type of land? Obviously, we know about Roswell not too soon after, but was this the first time that the Army had dealt with anything like this?
No, because I read books, all my colleagues' books. I'm the only one. Ryan Wood wrote an incredible book called Magic Eyes Only. I don't have it here. And it's got 93 crashes, and he has the Cape Girardeau, I think, crash as being the first one. And that's way before. And I think there was a crash in Texas, and that's way before. It was even in the 1800s. This one was the first one that we have enough information to deal with. The Cape Girardeau, they have, I think, torn up road, or they have pieces. We have witnesses, we have the location, and we have the metal. So this is the first crash before Roswell where we have everything. Roswell, yeah, we have witnesses, but it wasn't, in other words, those witnesses weren't there when it crashed. They have witnesses to the recovery. These kids were there when it crashed, and they watched their recovery it took a long time. In fact, they had to put it on a flatbed truck, an 18-wheeler, because there's an overpass near there, and they had to get it through the overpass. So to get it out. So I'm sorry, my phone is ringing, but we'll just let it go.
That's all right.
Okay.
You've mentioned the metal a few times. Yeah. Do you want to talk about the metal itself and tell the listeners about it, its properties, what your experiences are with the metal?
So that's Jacques' forte. What had happened was that I was working with Jose, and he had mentioned, this is in the book, they saw one little piece of foil. So Remy took it as a souvenir, and they fixed a windmill with it later. So I said, oh my God, the foil's gone. Then I find Sabrina had long strips of it in the grandfather's house. So he must have gone back and got it because she thought it was toys. They didn't have slinkies back then. So she's got these long strips of foil that she's scrunching up, and then it goes back to, this is in 1950. And of course we asked where it all was, and 70 years have passed, so we don't know where it is. And the piece that Jose went in there to get, because they wanted a tesoro. In those days, they wanted a souvenir. They knew what they saw, but they go, let's take a souvenir. But, he was, even today, Jose went to the Korean War at 17 years old and then became a state trooper in California, where he was even shot at. Jose has no fear of anything. He went in there, he took a crowbar, and the only thing on the wall was this piece. So he just pulled it out. It was locked in with a pin, and it was more of a snap-in thing. There were no nails or anything. It was more snap-in. And he took it and they hid it under the floorboards. And they hid it under the floorboards of the sheep herder. And then later they had to move it because the army came and asked if the kids had stolen anything, had taken anything. There's a couple of funny things about this case. First of all, the army asked Mr. Padilla, the father, if they could cut the gate because they were taking out a weather balloon. And it wasn't, the gate was too narrow. So even now you can see where they cut the gate to take out the weather balloon. But the father and Jose went to the bunkhouse and gave them back all the weather balloons they had collected while they were riding around on their horses, because they returned them to the army. So they knew this isn't a weather balloon. Here's all the ones we got for you guys. You want it back? And this thing was like, I think Jacques said it was like 5 tons. So it's no weather balloon. So they made a road especially to take it out. And the piece itself was hidden for many years. And after I had worked on it for 5 years, Jose gave it to me. I put it in a safe deposit box. By the time Jacques got to me, I just gave it to him. I said, look, take this to a university and go analyze it. And it is a kind of aluminum. I think he called it selenium. There is a name. It's in the book. And I think he also says what it is. And it looks like a terrestrial piece. It is not a piece of a windmill. Although it resembles that, I went to a windmill factory. I did the interview with the owner, who's owned it for like 80 years. He said that is not a piece of any windmill because the windmill factory is actually a warehouse. You can buy pieces. It was not, it is not, and windmill pieces are cast iron. This thing's aluminum. So are they still studying it? Yes. Is it in the hands of a university? Yes. Is it in the hands of scientists? Yes. It's been studied in Australia. They did, in fact, James Rigney, that worked on this with me, asked permission to release the analysis in Australia, because a lot of people worked on this with me. And could there be rare properties? We don't know. We don't know yet, but it was inside the craft.
Now, were there any issues, and I don't want to go into too much detail because we want people to go and read the book and get the detail for themselves and see that picture in their head. However, the kids, when they picked up this metal, were there any issues with exposure to radiation they picked up from it, or did they have any ill effects in soon after or later life?
No, they had ill effects from the bomb. No, they had the radiation that came. I mean, it is 20 miles from ground zero. San Antonio is 20 miles from ground zero. You can see where they exploded the bomb from that land. It is from Trinity. No, the problems they have came from the bomb, not from the craft. Did they ever see the beings again? No, because the next day, the boys went and told the father, and the father and Sheriff Apodaca, they waited a day, then they went and they saw that the craft was there. It had been covered by brush because I think they were trying to hide it, the army, and they went inside. They went inside. I mean, they walked around in there. And since Faustino and Sheriff Apodaca are now dead, we can't really talk to them. I know that Jose is, his relatives are relatives of Lonnie Zamora's. And, the Lonnie Zamora case, which Hynek worked on, is down the street. It's very close. And that also had to do with an egg-shaped craft, because this craft was not a flying saucer. It was avocado-shaped. And, everybody's relatives with everybody there. I mean, it's like small town. I spent so much time there that I know everybody, and everybody knows Jock and me, and we go to lunch with everybody, and it's that kind of situation. But the Lonnie Zamora case is also covered in this book, and the Valsol case in France, because they are all very similar. So what Jacques looks for is patterns. So the book itself is written by a very wonderful writer who's able to find patterns and has an incredible style. My job, quite frankly, was just to do the interviews. I had piled up the interviews in audio tape before I even started working with Jacques. So I had the audio tape and the transcripts. So he just basically reread all the transcripts, tried to put them in some kind of order, and put them in the book to describe what happened.
In your and Jack's research, were there any rumours or conjecture as to what may have happened with the beings? This was something quite a few listeners asked me to follow up on as well, that, as you say, the kids went the next day and the beings were gone. Was it a case that they've just disappeared, that no one knows, or were they taken?
Well, I can only tell you, this is just me. This is Paola Harris. Since I published and dealt with Clifford Stone for many years, and that was crash retrieval, and Clifford Stone just died. Before he died, I went to Roswell. He lived in Roswell, and I asked him about what happened to the beings in his particular situation. He did 12 recoveries. And he said that they came and got their own. Sometimes they left the bodies out there and they came and got their own. I said, "You're kidding." And he goes, I said, "You mean you didn't pack the bodies and take them to right?" He said, "No, sometimes we made an agreement. We would leave the bodies there and they would come and get their own." And we have to ask about those bodies, the description. They could be an advanced form of artificial intelligence, of a clone. They were tall, gray. No, they weren't tall. They were 3 feet tall, but they were gray, kind of insectoid looking because they had long arms. In fact, Jose said they looked like a standing up fire ant, teardrop eyes, and gray outfit or gray bodysuit. And, they could have been some kind of clone or some kind of artificial intelligence or whatever, but whatever they were, they did interact with the kids. They did, since Jose felt he wanted to go in there and help them. He said he wasn't afraid. He was very confused because they looked like children like they did. And he wanted to go in and give them a hand, but the 6-year-old began to cry. But he said Remy began to cry too because his eyes hurt. Because when you have burning mesquite all around, it's an uncomfortable situation. It's smoke and mesquite. And but Jose says to me, he's kidding all the time. He says, "Paula, if I had gone in there, you probably wouldn't see me today. I wouldn't be around to tell the story." And I said, "Jose, that would be a big shame," because I just love Jose. He's in his 80s. He's got what he's got. I can't believe it, is a photographic memory. He can remember the day. You ask him if it's a Thursday, Tuesday. I mean, he looks up and he remembers details that I could never. And I don't even know what I was doing when I was 9. He knows everything. He knows who he spoke to. He knows everything. So we have in this book a photographic memory, and then we have the other testimony of Remy.
Now, some classic cases over the years, parts of the story have changed now and again. Do you agree with those that say this is no exception, that there has been some details that have changed or not? And I'll just give you a quick quote. So, on Grant Cameron's 60 Minutes After Show panel, this was sent in by one of the listeners, Roswell researcher Don Schmidt claimed that he was approached by one of the witnesses 25 years ago and was given an entirely different account. And he believes that it's been changed now and he would want to know why. Do you agree with that, or would you totally refute that?
I disagree because they were kids. They're all children. They couldn't make it up if they tried. I mean, there was no frame of reference. There's no TV. There's no YouTube. There's no nothing. There's nothing has changed. They may, I don't know. I'm trying to remember. The only thing I think Jose told me he picked up.
That would be late 90s. I think Don's saying it late 90s. One of the witnesses approached him. So they would have been, 50s at that point. And had given them an account that was different to now. I don't have any more details than that, but that was what Don claimed on Grant Cameron's panel.
No, the kids never changed their story, ever. I mean, things like Jose told me he picked up the piece of foil, and then Remy says he picked up the piece of foil, but it's still a piece of foil. It doesn't matter who picked it up. They picked up a piece of foil. The piece of foil is picked up. One says he picked it up. The other one says he picked it up. Those are details that are ridiculous that may change. but there was a piece of oil they picked up. So we know that for sure. In all the time, and I have both of them on video from 2000 and, well, let's see, I did it 2013 on. I have video of them off and on. Nothing's changed. But again, I'm saying there's no case with kids, with children, with 9-year-old that is very sophisticated and a 6-year-old that is very sophisticated, because in those days they had to take care of the ranch. They were like the men of the family. The men had gone to war. There is no case like this. It isn't like, they lived it. It was their reality. So they can't change it because they lived it. It's what they remember from. And it's funny because when they're telling you that, they're reliving it again. They certainly weren't making it up. It was traumatic for them. But the thing on a psychological level is they had nothing to compare it to. There was nothing. There was no, Kenneth Arnold was 2 years later with flying saucers, and Roswell was 2 years later, and there's no magazines and there's no TV, and they just thought it was a plane crash, but it was not an airplane.
I think when it comes to witnesses, just my personal, when it comes to those little details, what I've always got to say is I've not spoken to any of these witnesses for any cases, so I don't know. But if you look back at my wedding was 8 years ago. And if you ask me to recall the day of the wedding, I can remember bits and pieces. If you ask my wife to recall the same wedding, she will remember the same stuff. But there might be little bits and pieces that I think I done, or I remember I gave this cake to such and such, and she would say, no, I done that. It's not that we're lying, we're just remembering it slightly differently, because as time passes, that's what happens. And that's not to justify in the past when people have lied about these things, but it's very easily done and it can happen. So that's why I never poo-poo a case based on a very small detail changing, because I think if anything, it's harder to keep a story straight with so many specific details. It's natural that these things change very slightly. So that's just food for thought for people.
Yeah, but let me tell you, historically, this is not a UFO book. This is a history book.
Yeah.
So because Remy at that time had diabetes, I could not get film footage, but who got film footage was Swiss Television. They went and flew to Gig Harbor, high definition television interview. So I care that we have two versions. So being, Italian, I went and spoke. I spoke in northern Italy in Turin, and I got on a train in Milano, and I went past Lake Como where George Clooney lives, and I went to Lugano. I got the film footage. I have it here. Anything that we do, we have both witnesses. I cannot do a story with one witness, but that's a lot of trouble for me and a lot of money out of my pocket to go traveling to get the film footage of the original other person, because we need both. Plus, Remy wrote a book called Born in Ground Zero on the Edge of Area 51 or something that you can't get anymore. So Jacques took that book, his own memories, Remy's own memories, his own words. So it's like word for word what these kids said. It's not our interpretation of any of it. It's them. It's their story, frameworked around what was going on at the time. I really care that people understand this is a history book. Something happened when the atomic bomb exploded. It affected the whole town, but I feel that it's more of a history book than a UFO book. And because an incident happened that I think has extraordinary significance for humanity. And I care more about that than I do about like the medal. But Jacques cares about all of it. He cares about the medal too. But I care about the statement that was made.
You mentioned the children and how unique that is, and there's an innocence to a child's recollection of an event because it tends to be very truthful. And we've got like the aerial school phenomena event that happened, and that was documented in the Phenomenon documentary. What do you think the significance is of these objects and beings like this appearing near or next to children?
That's an incredible question, Andy. because every time I see the aerial plus the Westall, and I helped James Fox with that. I knew James Rigney. I put them together. He did the Australian case because of me. I consulted so many films. If you look at even Stephen Greer's films, I do a lot of consulting. For me, the most moving part of those movies are the kids. I mean, the end of the aerial case and the phenomena. Oh my God! I mean, those children aren't making anything up. They don't even know how to. They don't even know how to express what they saw. Poor kids. I mean, I'm watching them draw these things. Like, it seems like they're very honest. That's what they saw. They're going to draw them exactly what they saw. And this case, they're children too. They're children. They're going to draw exactly what it looked like to them, even if they are in their 70s and 80s. This is what they saw.
Now, with that ability to retell accurately and truthfully, we touched earlier on the potential that these incidents aren't crashes and that they may happen deliberately. I would just like you, Paula, to quickly touch on what the gifting field is for people that may or may not have heard of that term.
I don't know what that term is, if you wanted to.
Oh, so the gift
field, the gifting?
Yes.
The gifting?
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
I think that was my bad Scottish accent, yeah.
Now, gifting. I've been thinking about this a lot because then, I sat down and I said, these kids, first of all, the first time that story was told to Timothy Good. It's in Timothy Good's book. And Jacques even mentioned the book it's in. So Timothy Good, who I consider one of the best, if not the best researcher on the planet, because he does field research, he goes to the place, went to Gig Harbor, Washington, and talked to Remy. And it's in his book. And he's also got metal analysis in his book. And then Ryan Wood put it in his book, Magic Eyes Only. And then I get there. And then Jacques gets there. And I'm thinking to myself, did those beings know what we were going to do? Did those beings know that whatever was, that action back, and if there was no time and space, could they have known that eventually this would come out and it would talk about the atomic bomb as being one of the changing historical events for this planet, and that we ought to look at the damage that nuclear has done? Could they have known that we would do this? That we would do this book? Because it's going to make people think, that's for sure. The idea that we are playing with nuclear and playing kind of a chess game that no one will win. The only way we can do these war games is to checkmate. I got it, you got it, we checkmate. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. We can't uninvent. And the atomic bomb was not as bad as the H-bomb, which, when I told you I had those problems with that story, and he was French, there was 800 H-bomb tests done in the Pacific, 800. And we did more. America did them in the Atlantic. This is insanity. I'm not surprised somebody's flying over the H-bomb testing, because we're killing all the fish and all the coral and all the oceans and all this stuff. I mean, there's a message here. Are you people insane? And you can't put nuclear back in the bottle. I mean, you can't. I mean, once it's out there. And everybody will say, well, we needed to do that to stop World War II, especially Jacques is brilliant about talking about the Japan surrender and how we had to do that with Nagasaki. He's brilliant because he read all the books, and then I would read them. He'd say, did you read Children of Trinity? And I'd say, no, and I'd buy it. And they'd say, did you read this? And I'd say, no. And he got all the details, and I'd buy the book. So that's when I want to tell your viewers, this for me isn't a UFO book. This is like, what the heck are we doing on this planet? And what are we doing? And it can't get any better because, the weapons are more sophisticated and they're worse. And so whatever was watching back then, is it watching now? I mean, is it watching the insanity now? I mean, those beings, they actually communicated mentally with the kids in that they, looked at them for at least an hour. I mean, it isn't like they glimpsed at them, they were communicating. And then those kids consequently come to us and we do the story.
I think you've answered what was going to be my next question, is what do you want people to take away from the book? But what I'd like to ask you is, what place does this event, the Trinity event, have for you now within the UFO lore or history, as you say?
Well, it's probably the most complete story I've ever done. 9 years is a long time. And if Jacques hadn't come on board and we had talked about it, and I really want to encourage people to work together. I mean, would have been nice if all the Roswell researchers will work together at a table and put together the mosaic, and all the researchers will work together. It wasn't until he came along that I even saw what was going on, because he had the framework. I had the details. He had the framework. He said, you have the colors and I have the canvas. And we did it. And if we hadn't kept going 4 months ago, I would have never found the third witness. And it happened by accident. We were sitting, Jacques and I were outside sitting at Jose's. He has like a mobile home, and Jose was talking about the old days. He's got a photographic memory. He knows everybody he'll name who died and who had 5 kids and all this. We're listening to all of this. And then all at once he says, well, my niece was with my father, living with my father and mother, and she saw the fiber optics. And I said, what? And where's your niece? And he said, Los Angeles. And Jacques and I looked at each other and we said, is she still alive? And he said, yes. So we flew to Los Angeles to question her. And she had a story that even Jose didn't know about. She was in the house. So we found out that at 7 years old, the father went back out there and got other stuff that Jose didn't know he had done. So we're going, oh my God, if we hadn't kept going on this story, we would have never found the third witness. So research is not 1.5 years. We're a 9-year mark here, the 9 year. And then Jacques keeps saying, I said, well, it's over. We've written the book. He goes, no, it's not over. We don't know what's going to come out of the woodwork. So research, real field research, not gossip. But when you're getting you have to worry about snakes. We even dug. Can't even tell you how many snakes I mean, the whole New Mexico. I've been to Ground Zero twice. It's only open once a year. And I've been, I went in there. There's a black monolith where they exploded the bomb. And when I went in there the first time, the sand was all green green glass, because it had fused with the power of that radiation. It became fused. It looked like emeralds all over the ground. The second time when I went with Jacques, there wasn't that much of it there, but you live the life of the atomic testing there. You can see Oppenheimer. You can see those scientists trying to figure out what's going on. You can see the McDonald, I think it was called the McDonald farm that they put there to see how it would blow. You can feel it. In fact, at a certain point, the dust was so heavy and I didn't feel well. I had to ask to leave. But again, Andy, the thing about this book you asked me about is I lived this case. And this case changed the world. It showed us that somebody is interested. And I'm not going to say who it is. I don't know what the story is with ETs or anything. But somebody was watching. So if somebody's watching here in 1945, I'm convinced somebody's watching everywhere.
Well, listen, that probably moves us on nicely. Just before listener questions for me to ask, the books came out at an incredibly opportune time, one that I doubt you could have predicted unless yourself or Jacques had some foresight. Just in the last week or two, we've had a lot of mainstream media coverage of the subject, the topic. Luis Elizondo, Chris Mellon, Alex Dietrich, David Fravor, Ryan Graves have been on 60 Minutes, CBS News, various different shows around the world. How do you feel the book coming out now fits in with what's going on? Do you feel it accompanies and it's coming out at a good time, or do you feel this has its separate place?
Well, I'd like to deviate from that question a bit. I don't understand why sightings, whether they be next to an aircraft carrier or anything, when we know this is real. I don't think disclosure needs to come out of any government agency, especially if you've been in the field like 40 years like I have. I've covered so many stories, you name it. I've been all over the map, and Latin America for me is the most fertile ground. 60 years ago, we had Kenneth Arnold seeing, craft over Mount Rainier, and everybody took him seriously because he was a pilot, and the whole world went crazy. I don't see the difference between 60 years ago and now. So if he sees craft and we think he's credible because he's a pilot, and then the whole world, front page, the UFOs are real over Mount Rainier. What's the difference between that and the only difference is that the New York Times covers it now, and mainstream media will cover it, but we're still at the sighting stage. We don't know where it is, why they're there, So far, nobody's bombed anybody. But again, I'm going to present a question to your audience. Somebody's watching. What are they watching? Nobody's bombed anybody. I mean, are you kidding? If they were going to kill us, they should have done it back in ground zero. 150-mile radius of radiation, 70,000 people were affected. If they thought we were insane, it could have happened back then. Why in the world would it happen now? I mean, what's the difference? 60, 70 years have passed. I don't think this is a national threat, but you have to look at the agenda. It's still sightings. It's still, and I predict, I'm going to go on your show, predict that the conflict between Israel and Palestine, there's going to be sightings. And during Vietnam, that's when Clifford Stone said they had the most activity. 3 of his retrieval cases were in Vietnam. So what are they on vacation in Vietnam? It's like, are they on vacation in New Mexico? They decide, let's go and see this planet. We're going to New Mexico. We're going to Vietnam. We're going to Russia. We're going, it's just logic. It's logic. Whatever is happening to get our attention. And I don't necessarily feel like that's a huge story when disclosure doesn't necessarily come out that way. It comes out from meticulous research, reading some books, not all YouTube, but reading some books, looking at the scenario. And I'm going to finish by saying, put together the puzzle, the mosaic. There is a mosaic here, and it is not an American mosaic. It's a universal mosaic because even Russia has had some incidents.
Potentially it's a multi-universal mosaic.
Yes.
But what I would ask then, because one thing that, and I agree that throughout different periods of history, and I'm 35, so I've only seen so much of it, and I'm far newer in what I do in this topic than your people like yourself and Jack. But one thing that is happening in the background just now that hasn't been happening in the past is we've got the Senate task force report potentially about to come out. Do you feel that's going to move anything forward at all in terms of the conversation?
Well, for who? We're having the conversation anyway. You and me are having a conversation. Everybody's having a conversation. My kids are having a conversation. New York Times having a conversation. If there's a task force, what I'm most worried about is the agenda. I mean, why? So that we can get appropriations for some kind of exotic weapons to shoot at them? What is the agenda here? It isn't to tell the people, I don't think. It isn't like, okay, we're going to tell the truth finally. All these years, we've not told the truth, so we have a guilty conscience. No, there is an agenda. Would people please get a clue? Nobody does anything without an agenda. I mean, and if the agenda is one where it becomes a national threat so that we can get appropriations, that's what we did with our wars. I just talked to Carol Rosen, who said, Werner von Braun said, this is the last card. Well, it'd be stupid because these beings have been around forever and they haven't done anything. So what, 2021, they're going to do something? We need to use our brains here. there is an agenda. And unfortunately, I'm not aware of what it is, but I'm certainly not thinking this is any kind of disclosure. Like what? They just decide they're going to tell the truth. I mean, we already know. We talked to everybody. I've talked to Colonel Corso was my main, probably the big story I ever did, because I brought Colonel Corso to Italy because he couldn't speak here. There was a lawsuit against his book. So spending a lot of time with Colonel Philip Corso, I realized, and he was, Pentagon Research and Development, that the real secret was being secret because of the technology. Nobody cares about the creatures, the inside, who's in there, or why they're here. The technology is the secret. So if Colonel Corso is telling the truth in 1998, what are we doing in 2021 thinking it's real? He told the truth in the day after Roswell. I've dealt with the former defense minister of Canada who called about Corso's book, Clifford Stone. I mean, so many. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, was my good friend. We had long conversations. For me, disclosure is for him talking about this. What about Gordon Cooper? That's disclosure. Gordon Cooper said he saw a landing during a test. Well, you mean the only kind of disclosure we think is disclosure is when we see gun camera footage? People that have been following this know that we have had some brave people tell the truth. I don't think they're going to make a statement. Now, they can. You can get some reports, and you get a batch of reports saying, we've had these vehicles around us, forever. But again, I just painted you a scenario of who's watching. Who's watching? Why are they watching? They're not on vacation.
There's a lot I could go into and talk about, but that would be selfish because I have a ton of listener questions here, and I know we're short on time. So if we could get through as many with your answers being as quick as possible, that would be great for the listeners, Paola. A lot of really good stuff there, though. Thank you. First question was from Tyler. He asks, Paola, yourself and Jacques had purchased a piece of metal from the craft from another person. How did that person obtain the metal, and how did you verify that the piece of metal was the same piece the kids took from the craft?
We never purchased anything. Nobody sold anything. First of all, you got to get off of that. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation. When Remy was alive, he wanted to sell it. He never sold it. He hung on to it, and then Jose got it, and Jose gifted it to me. He gifted it. I put it in my safe deposit box for 2 years. This is not about making money. I didn't know.
So there was no cash. Yeah.
No, I didn't know what to do with it. I thought, it's there. What am I going to do? I don't know what to do with it. And then Jacques came along and he said, I have a lab. I have some labs and we had cut a piece off and given it to Jaime Maussan in Mexico. So he had it. And James Rigney took it back to Australia. So we cut some pieces off. We didn't buy anything from anybody. So where is it now? At a university? It will be seen by the general public in 10 years after we're gone. And it is gifted to a university. Nobody's buying this stuff. This is for the people. The whole story is not ours. It's the people's story. So what
Next
did he
question,
ask?
Paula, from Craig.
How do you know it's real? Because they hid it. I mean, they hid it. I mean, when I talked to Sabrina, she told me where they hid it. She watched them hide it. And she goes, they went behind the bunkhouse and they made this hole and they hid it. And I knew this is a third witness. She said, I was watching them and they hid it. And they hid it. But they didn't talk about it because they took it. You're not supposed to take anything from the inside of a craft. The kids going, oh my God, they didn't steal it. They just took it. Okay. They took it.
So the next question from Craig, and I feel this is a question that's really pertinent for yourself as well. How did you feel about the community response when the book was being announced a few weeks ago? And a lot of the comments, Paula, were aimed at yourself because your name suddenly became attached to that. Did you feel any attack from when things seemed to change for people?
This is a personal question. I've been attacked, and I'm kind of hurt because I've been working for 40 years with the top level people. I've written 5 books, all witness testimony, and done a good job. I don't know what's going on, so I can't give you any hypothesis, but I did my job. And what came out was, that I needed Jacques Vallee to verify my work, and that, that I need all these things, that I was a piece of a windmill, that I was peddling a story. And these are all jealous, cruel people that are out there. And unfortunately, I brought a lot of them to the crash site before I met Jacques. And people, are not nice. I find the UFO community is not nice. They're not nice. Jacques didn't want to say anything until we got the cover, the real cover. And he was nervous that if we put that out there, that everybody'd rush there without even reading the book, because the cover has a map on it. So I agreed with him that he would put his, but I was always involved. I was always involved from day one. He just did the Joe Rogan show with that. But afterwards, he told the world that it was both of our stories. What I didn't like is that people who are ignorant. Actually, Jacques Vallee came to me. He wrote to me. I started working with Alan Hynek for 6 years. And after he died, I swore, because I really suffered. I suffered when Alan Hynek died. I had never met Jacques Vallee. In my later years, I'd never met him. I didn't even look for him. Out of the clear blue sky, he writes about the metal. He wants to know about the metal. So that's how I connected with Jacques Vallee. He wrote to me. He didn't even know I worked for Alan, I don't think. But, so that it's hurtful to have gossip and then insinuate that the only way to get the story out is by hooking up with Jacques. This was a kind of thing I think the ETs knew, that the only way we could tell the story is to have the framework of the atomic bomb and everything around it, and the analysis of the metal. It had to be complete. So yeah, that was a very personal question. I don't like that's one of the reasons, Andy, I don't like doing the UFO sphere. I mean, it's not very nice sometimes, and I'm extremely professional. I am not a media star. I do not go on television. I am not paid, but I love the investigative part. Somebody says, what do you love about this? It's like a detective. I mean, I just found a witness about 6 months ago. I'm so excited. I love doing the work, and there is no support. I've never had anybody support it. It's come out of my pocket. My children are angry. They want me to go to the Bahamas and sit in a hotel and drink Mai Tais. And they say, you're out of your mind, Mom. And I say, no, this is so interesting.
Well, thank you for answering that one. The next one from Stephen is, could you ask Paola if the crash site in the new book is the same as the one Diana Pasulka referenced in her book American Cosmic?
No. She was on the one in Daddle, and she was, and Jacques had been working on that too. That was in Daddle. No, that's a whole other city. No. And this is much more detailed than Diana Pasulka. She went down there blindfolded one time. This is 9 years of going down there. It's like sleeping in the Holiday Inn or whatever, having dinner at the same place, knowing all these people. No. That was a very superficial kind of thing, and it was in Daddle. This is somewhere. This is San Antonio. We said where it was.
Next up from Graham, how do you reconcile your nuts and bolts approach to the phenomenon with that of Jacques Vallee approaching from a consciousness point of view? How was that between both of you? Is that something you discussed a lot, or you differed in?
Yes. No, it's the other way. I think Jacques has gotten more nuts and bolts. I'm consciousness. It's the other way around. I mean, Jacques says, calm down. I said, but consciousness, what if it's, like a manifestation? Calm down. Let's analyze the metal. It's more the other way. That's why I work in Latin America now. I don't work in the States. I am very much a fan of Grant Cameron's, and he and I are walking the same path. I started with you couldn't start with more nuts and bolts than J. Allen Hynek. You couldn't start. That was like putting pins in maps. And not only that, but the case, and Jacques told me this, to change Hynek's mind was the Zamora case, because there was, footprints and, the thing, made an indentation and all that. So I had to shift my thinking. And I am now thinking of what I keep reminding Jacques of. I said, Jacques, don't you remember you said this was a manifestation of consciousness to teach us a lesson? And then he goes back to the metal. I'm going, no. It's like, okay, but we're both on consciousness, but he is a scientist. This is a scientific book. He wants the scientific community to look at the method of research. He is very, very serious about science. He's good at it. He was driving me nuts with the parts of it where he'd call me and say, okay, now call Jose and see how many wheels the flatbed was. And I'd say, what difference does that make? And he'd go, I have to get the ton, how many tons it was. And things like, I would never do that. That's the scientific part. So I said, who cares about how many wheels the thing had? And of course, Jose, who's watching the whole recovery for a week, remembers everything. So it was a joy, a collaboration to work with a scientist. Jacques Vallee is a consummate scientist.
Final listener question from Dave. I've had to miss a load out just given we're running out of time. You've spent a lot of time with Colonel Philip Corso and Jacques Vallee. Have either of them ever alluded to how many crash events have occurred outside of the US from which materials have been obtained?
No, but can I encourage people to get Ryan Wood's book? It's called Magic Eyes Only. It has 93 crashes. And you have to start reading. I don't understand people. I read all kinds of material to get this. He's got enumerated. He's got the 1945 crash in there. He even has the Kingman, Arizona crash, which is referred to with Dan Burrish. He has everything in there in that book. I don't know if you can get it anymore, but there have been crashes in other places of the world. And the one in Virginia, for me, is one of the most interesting. That's Virginia, Brazil, because the little beings were not like we shove people, Greys, Nordics, and reptilians. The ignorance of our way of researching is incredible. The Virginia case, and I did the work with Vittorio Paccaccini, who came to the United States, and we talked about it extensively in 1997, is a little red. He looked like he had 3 protuberances. He almost looked like the devil. He had red skin. They had red skin. They were little. And when they went to recover him, the Americans had taken out the craft, but the little being was cowering against the wall. And that's when the policeman, Marco Charisse, put him on his lap, took him to the hospital. And Marco Charisse died 2 weeks later of tumors, because you can't just pick up a little being who might have some kind of biologic different. If people would read the Virginia case, that the Americans took out the craft, because I think the deal is that there is a deal where America's the first one to do the crash retrieval. Don't ask me where the craft went or who hit or who's dealing with this right now. But when I was talking to Clifford Stone, he told me that one of the last crashes was in Georgia, the state of Georgia. And I was going, you're kidding. And he goes, no. He says, and do they, then the next question is, why do they crash? Well, who knows? Are they even like ours or theirs? And then you really get into it. Who is in there and who made it and all this. I have no definitive answers, but will people start using their brains and do some research? Okay.
Paula, we'll finish off with a quick fire round. I've got a few things I would like you to touch on, as short or as long on each one as you want. The first one is your thoughts on Stephen Greer.
He's the only one who walks his talk. He did the Disclosure Project. His heart is in the right place. I helped him with all the military people in Italy. The Disclosure Project opened the doors. And then I have been with him on the CE5s. And I think his heart is in the right place. However, there's a lot of controversy there.
Do you think he has ever faked any of those CE5 events?
No, I've been on 4 of them. Oh my God. I mean, watch the movie Sirius. We were in Crestone in this huge, Crestone is the darkest place on earth in Colorado. There's this huge UFO that came over, and that's the only time I've ever cried, actually. It was over our heads. It stayed there for a few minutes. I mean, this is after like an hour and a half of meditation. And then 2 F-16s came and chased it away. It just went zip. And it's in the beginning of the film Sirius. It's in the beginning, the very beginning. You see it, then you see the F-16s come in. I don't think those pilots knew that they were going after a UFO. They were given coordinates.
The next one is Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, that's a paranormal. That should be studied.
Your thoughts on the Wilson Davis documents?
I don't know anything about them.
Do you believe they're real?
How can I say that when I haven't read them, don't know anything about them? I don't know anything about them.
Do you prefer the term UFO or UAP?
Oh, you can name 50 million different, names for aerial phenomena. I don't use UFO very often.
What do you like?
Or UAP, just craft. Just craft. I mean, I don't anymore, Andy. We can't tell if it's ours or theirs. So it's just craft. I don't know whose it is anymore.
And the last one, Paula, is what does disclosure mean to you?
Well, because I have a master's in education, I'd like it to be the study of the visitation on planet Earth and not call it disclosure. I mean, disclosure happened way back when. I've talked to the people not only in the 1945 case, but when they were alive. Walter Hott, I spoke to Walter Hott. I spoke to Glenn Dennis, who was a mortician. These people are telling the truth. If you bother to do it, it's not your opinion. It shouldn't be your opinion based on nothing. It should be a study where you go down and speak to the people. Or you should read the original material from the source. Read the original material, the source material. As a teacher, if you gave me a paper and you were quoting YouTube, I'd give you a D minus. You got to read something. You got to talk to somebody. I'd say, pick up a phone. When anybody ever asks me about a case, I say, pick up the phone. Talk to them. Go down there.
Paula, it's been great speaking with you. I'll just let everyone know that Trinity, the Best Kept Secret, co-authored by yourself and Jacques Vallee, is available now. And I would just ask people, if you're picking it up, consider supporting your local bookstores, because they are obviously struggling during the pandemic and everything as well. But you all know where it's available, and I'll put some links on the description as well. Thanks very much for your time, Paula.
Thank you. And it's available on Amazon now, so you can get it.
That'll be in the links, folks. Cheers, okay. Paula.
All right.
Folks, at the start of this year, I got a bit of a health scare, and it kick-started me to getting fitter, healthier, and generally looking after myself better. A healthier breakfast was high on my priority list, and it should be for you too. Magic Spoon is the perfect way to get in your morning protein, eating cereal that tastes like it did when you were a kid without all the bad stuff. I can promise you there is nothing unidentified in this cereal. The variety pack has 4 flavours, including cocoa, fruity, frosted and peanut butter. This pack has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein and only 4 net grams of carbs. There are only 140 calories per serving. It's keto friendly, gluten free, grain free, soy free and low carb. It's delicious but super healthy cereal that really brings joy to your mornings, afternoons or actually any time of day. Go to magicspoon.com/thatUFO to grab a variety pack and try it today. Be sure to use our promo code THATUFO at checkout to save $5 off your order. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, so if for any reason you don't like it, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to get your delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/thatUFO and use that code THATUFO to save $5 off. Thank you, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring this episode. that is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little Baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative gamma state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. I called out to my boys, they thought this was noise, they thought it was a dream, they thought it was my toys, they thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think they be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes. It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the class with you that sonic boom? Got sleep paralysis and got me in my room.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.